The RNC wraps up without anything on guns, plus the second half of the NRA's corruption trial heats up. All this and more on the news update.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the news update brought to you from thereload.com. This episode brought to you also by The Dispatch, our good sponsor, but more on that later. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogleman, joined as always by Reload founder Stephen Gutowski. And thereload.com, of course, folks, is where you can head on over and sign up for a free newsletter today to stay up to date on all things happening in guns. This week, obviously, the big story is that the Republican National Convention just wrapped up. Former President Donald Trump officially accepted the party's nomination to run for president again. And for our purposes anyway, one of the big stories is that guns were almost entirely absent from the entire event. And in fact, former President Trump's acceptance speech.
Yeah, they were entirely absent from his acceptance speech, right? Hour and a half, or I think it was 92 minutes technically. Longest acceptance speech in history from what a number of different news outlets are reporting. I think he also has the second and third longest is sort of the theme of his to go on like that at these conventions. But remarkably, he did not even once mention the Second Amendment or gun rights or any gun policies he plans to pursue if he's reelected. So that's part of the trend we've seen from the Republican Party over the last little bit here, because as you mentioned, the RNC also didn't focus on gun policy at all. Really stark contrast to what we saw the first time Donald Trump ran for president. The last time the Republican Party had a platform or a convention, back in 2016, where they had Chris Cox, who was the head of the National Rifle Association's Institute for Legislative Action, speak at the RNC in 2016. And they didn't have anyone from the NRA or from any gun rights group speak during the actual event itself. And really didn't have much mention of guns on stage at all. The closest you got really was J.D. Vance, former President Trump's vice presidential pick, who had a sort of anecdote about his grandmother when she passed finding 19 loaded guns in her house and saying that, the party wanted to protect people like that who are trying to protect their family. And that was the closest that you got to any sort of gun talk, gun rights talk, at least. Obviously, the former president, talked about his assassination attempt, and that was a big part of his speech, but he didn't speak at all about gun policy, which is more what we are concerned with here. Obviously, at the Reload, that's our focus and our beat, what we cover. And then, of course, that also relates back to the story that you actually broke at the time, which is that they removed all of the gun policy promises from the 2024 platform. The 2016 platform had a whole section on gun rights and made a bunch of gun policy promises, both in what they would support and try to adopt, like national reciprocity, and also what they would oppose, like, AR-15 bans. And none of that is in the 2024 platform, although it did at least have a single line promising to fight for the right to keep and bear arms. You didn't even get that single line in Trump's speech. So it's pretty big shift in terms of how they're approaching the issue at the moment. Right? I mean, that's fair to say, I think.
Certainly, especially because, like you said, Trump spoke for 92 minutes and it was sort of all over the place, but he did talk about policy things. He talked about immigration for a long time. He talked about trade a little bit, a lot of foreign policy all over the place. So it's not like policy stuff and goals didn't come up in the speech. Right. It's just that guns were not one of those goals that were worth mentioning, apparently.
Yeah. And I think that says a lot. The silence speaks very loudly. It's hard to look at that and conclude anything other than that the Trump campaign, the Republican Party, at the very least, do not think that gun rights policies are helping them in re-election. To be clear, they have not changed their positions as far as they've said publicly, right? They haven't even hinted that they're changing things like they did with their positions on abortion, right? There was a lot of sort of telegraphing that change before it came. A lot of Trump kind of hinting that maybe this is bad for politics to support these different abortion restrictions. He hasn't done that with gun policy to this point. Instead, he just kind of dropped it. He's not talking about it. He has previously talked about it, right? He's given 2 speeches to the NRA during this campaign where he's made a bunch of gun policy promises. He picked J.D. Vance, who, while he hasn't been in politics very long, is somebody whose record, he was elected in 2022 as senator from Ohio, but during his 2 years, year and a half, whatever it's been in Congress, he has voted for pro-gun legislation and against gun restrictions. So he's got a pretty solid record insofar as one exists, and rhetorically, like Trump, he's been very pro-gun to this point. But it seems like as they're getting closer to the actual election, they've determined this is one of the issues they don't want to talk about. It's not the only one, right? I mean, you saw, well, actually, it's interesting. They dropped Taiwan from the platform, but Trump mentioned them in his speech.
Same with the debt and spending. They dropped that from the platform, but he mentioned that in the speech as well. And so there's certain things that he added.
Right. I don't know. It's the only takeaway you can have looking at how the RNC turned out and how Trump's speech in particular went is that they are really de-emphasizing guns as an issue going into this election. I would expect that they will keep making promises to gun rights advocates in those spaces, right? If he is talking to gun rights advocates or if his campaign staff, in fact, that happened at the RNC, right? You reported, or you wrote about, there was some good local reporting on this. There was a sort of off-site meeting or event held by the United States Concealed Carry Association, right? That featured one of the top Trump campaign officials and several Republican congressmen, where there were some promises made there, right?
Yeah, they was sort of your general. Most of it was just vague. We got to support gun rights. Gun rights are important. Yeah, we can't ban the AR-15. But Trump's senior campaign advisor, Chris Lascivita, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's obviously a prominent part of Trump's reelection campaign. Yeah. He signaled to the crowd that Trump would, in fact, keep supporting the Second Amendment. And the way to do that would be by appointing more pro-gun judges, essentially. He emphasized that Trump has remade the judiciary. And, so that essentially was the extent of their promise. But another note is that he brought up, and is something that you reported that Trump brought up at the NRA meeting, was he sort of emphasized that gun owners don't vote. He sort of played that up again. So that maybe that speaks to why he doesn't feel.
It's interesting.
But they've both mentioned it now, and there's actually not a ton of evidence that it's even true. But I'm just not sure why they keep bringing up that gun owners don't vote.
It's they're certainly giving them less of a reason to come out and vote for them. Yeah, at this point, like that's one of the weird things. But maybe they've just sort of. I don't know. What I would imagine is that they're going to keep doing what they did at the RNC, which is not make it much of an issue in high profile settings that they think swing voters or independents may be paying attention to. But during events that they think gun owners are going to be particularly engaged with, I would imagine they'll continue to make the same policy promises that they have previously. It doesn't appear like they're going to change their position on gun policy at this point. Obviously Trump has a mixed record on that to some degree, at least his comments. Obviously he did the bump stock ban unilaterally, which was thrown out by the Supreme Court just recently, and has kind of served as a a template for President Biden with his gun restrictions that he's tried to implement through ATF rules. And he expressed openness to red flag law, and he infamously said take the guns first and have due process second. But I would expect that he's not going to make a major policy change right now, because at this point he's polling the best he's polled in any of his presidential races in July, right? He's ahead nationally, and he's ahead in the battleground states, and there's no real reason for them to make major shifts in how they're handling the policy positions that they have. What I would worry about, though, is this silencing of the gun issue certainly indicates that they don't believe it's helping them, and that maybe they think it's hurting them. And so if the polls were to close, which frankly is exactly what you should expect to happen, this point right here after the convention and after he survived an assassination attempt, and with Joe Biden floundering as much as he's been, to the point where it's entirely possible he gets replaced or steps down from the ticket on the Democratic side. There's a lot of reasons to think this is kind of over the next at least week or two will be the peak of Trump's lead. Now, there's no way to predict the future, but generally speaking, polls tighten as you get closer to an election, especially in a country like ours that has been so polarized over the last several election cycles. It's unlikely you're going to see a landslide on either side. And so as polls close, or if future events lead to Trump trailing in the polls, that's when I think you would start to be more concerned that maybe they offer up some sort of gun policy change to try and woo moderate voters, swing voters, like they've done with abortion.
Yeah.
That's what I look at this and see. Not some sort of immediate change, not some guarantee that there's going to be a big push for gun restrictions from Trump, but the potential for one to come down the line.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot more about this on the interview podcast, because I'm having Cam Edwards from Bearing Arms on, and so that's going to be the main focus of that. So I think that's a good spot for us to leave in, and anybody who wants to hear more about that stuff and hear Cam's perspective, which is usually very insightful on these things. He's one of the people that I trust most on gun policy and politics. He's always following along very closely and is honest in his reaction. So, check out that when it comes out, either Sunday for Reload members or Monday for everyone else. But we have, of course, other exciting news, because the other big thing that happened, and perhaps these two things go hand in hand, the downplaying of guns at the RNC and the beginning of the NRA's remedies phase of its corruption trial in New York. They both coincided with one another, right? And so we've got extensive coverage on what's happening up at the NRA civil trial, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you reported on it as well, as we had Joseph Brucker, who's contributed for us in the past, was also present for the second phase of the trial. And I completely agree with your assessment that this might be related. This is something that's sort of been floating in the back of my mind recently is, we've talked about this before, but it doesn't get much discussion, that the NRA really, even in its beleaguered state over the last few years, really does matter, because it was the only gun group, and it still, for the most part, is the only gun group that actually interfaces with federal politics. It's the only one that power really recognizes. If you think about politicians don't really talk to the other gun groups, they're very active. They do things like litigation, but in terms of actually interfacing and being a constant reminder of the needs of gun voters or perceived needs of gun voters, it was really only the NRA. And when they're embattled on all sides and mired in internal fights, whether it's board elections or it's actual, corruption lawsuits, and they're not able to be that constant presence. I do think those things are related, where we've seen sort of gun politics go on the back burner for the Republican Party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's especially true with Donald Trump in particular. GOA and some of the other gun rights groups have purchased with, like, the House Freedom Caucus, for instance. Some of the more conservative congressmen or senators will engage with them, certainly. But the NRA is your more mainstream gun rights group, where you're getting a lot more Republicans engaging with them, and Democrats traditionally, in the past at least, not as much these days. We've talked about in the past, it's been kind of a push-pull on the partisan side of when it comes to gun politics, where polarization generally has pulled Democrats into really cohesion around a position for needing more gun restrictions. And then the NRA and other gun rights groups have really pushed into that too, leaned into the polarization itself, demonizing the Democratic Party along the way, and making the effect greater, I think. But regardless, Donald Trump has had a particularly close relationship specifically with the NRA. And this whole scandal, which we are now half a decade into, I know that's pretty crazy, and the pandemic kind of warps our time perception a lot, but this stuff started in 2019, which is now 5 years ago, and they are still mired in the middle of it. And there still isn't, frankly, a good sense of where it's going to end up. Right. When all is said and done, those dispatches that Joseph Brooker has provided us, and he's done a really good job of just trying to give everyone the flow of what's happening in the trial. Those have been great, and they give you a sense of some of the disconnect between even just not just the AG and the NRA, but inside of the NRA itself. And so does the piece that I wrote that you mentioned. Like, there were some reforms proposed by the NRA's audit committee that would add some transparency, and some of the things that even the AG has asked for, but also that a lot of reformers have asked for. Not all of the things, mind you, but some of them. And the response from one of the reformer board members was that he's basically given up on fixing the organization from inside, and is kind of going scorched earth against them. His email is not calm and collected or sober, as we would say. It's a very aggressive and emotional response to what he's experienced so far at the NRA. And it's we really have no idea how that's going to turn out. And like I mentioned earlier, the previous RNC, the gun rights speech was given by a guy named Chris Cox, who ran the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action. He does not run that anymore. He got pushed out of the NRA over this corruption scandal. As part of that, he was pushed out. And so he was a key connection between the NRA and Donald Trump in 2016, when the NRA was one of the only major, maybe you could even say the only major outside group to back Trump's successful bid for president. And so that got them a lot of pull with him, I think, over the coming years. And, he didn't do absolutely everything they wanted, but even the bump stock ban was sort of an NRA alternative idea to legislation banning bump stocks. This was sort of a pressure relief valve thing at the time politically. Now, it took a whole year to go through with it, and you can certainly question the wisdom of implementing the actual ban a year later. But the idea at the time was one, as Trump says himself, backed by the NRA as a kind of alternative to legislation after the Las Vegas shooting. And so he did really take their advice seriously for his presidency. And there were a number of times, I mentioned in my analysis piece that he considered backing an AR-15 ban after the El Paso Walmart shooting, but was rebuffed by both his staff and the NRA through, conversations behind closed doors. So they had a lot of pull, and this is really I think now, even after Cox was gone, you at least had LaPierre with a direct connection to Trump. They didn't have as close a relationship, but it was still a relationship. And then even he's gone now.
Right.
So they have just a lot less pull, it seems.
I was saying, and there's been continued turnover at Isla too, right? Because Cox's replacement also has departed from the NRA, Jason Ouimet. I think Randy Kozik is now in charge of Isla, but I'm not certain on that. You probably know
Randy
better than I
Kozik's
would.
in charge. He's at the RNC, but doesn't have any sort of official role, no speaking role for sure. And I don't think they had any official events at the RNC. I mean, USCCA kind of took up some of the slack. Had their own event that we just mentioned, but yeah, I think it's difficult to explain what's going on with the Republican Party and gun policy right now without looking at what's happened to the NRA. And of course, that trial is going to continue through next week at least. And we're expecting the judge to issue a ruling the Monday after the trial comes to an end. And so we'll continue to have updates. Joseph Brooker is going to keep posting, new summaries of what each witness is saying. So make sure you check that piece that we have going, the Reporter's Notebook. I think it's just a good account of what's happening in this case. And we'll continue to update it. So just check back there every day or so. And there should be some new testimony to read over, so you can get a feel of what each side is arguing in this case, because it's going to be important. What happens here will either determine whether the NRA carries on the way it is right now with the leadership it currently has. That's one option. That's what the NRA wants, at least what the NRA's lawyers want. And because, there are board members who are trying to get the judge to do something other than that. And then the AG wants a court-appointed consultant or monitor to come in and oversee basically the group's finances. We had an analysis piece that went through the specifics of what she's asking for and what she's saying would be off limits. So things like the members list wouldn't be turned over to the consultant, the court-appointed official under this proposal, which is, I think, one of the key things, one of the key sticking points in something like this, because the NRA's membership list is secret, it's private, and I think most people on that list would not want the government or the New York Attorney General to have access to it. So we'll see where she's not asking for access to it now, and I don't know if that's going to make the judge more amenable to giving her what she wants or not, but we'll continue to cover it and see where it goes.
Yeah, and listeners should definitely, like you said, check out those update pieces because this stuff is important. But speaking of courts and decisions, this one comes to us from the Eighth Circuit. We have a new pro-gun ruling, the first merits decision from a federal appeals court since Rahimi was handed down. So sort of our first sense at the appellate level of what that decision may or may not have meant for Second Amendment litigation. And in this case, it was striking down Minnesota's requirement that you must be 21 to apply for a concealed carry permit. That's fairly common in a lot of these shall issue states. They make 21 the benchmark. And in this case, a 3-judge panel said that was unconstitutional to deprive 18 to 20-year-olds from also being able to apply. So interesting.
Yeah, another in a string of victories on this front for gun rights activists. That 18 to 20-year-old demographic and some of the restrictions that exist around them, they've really been challenged throughout the country, and you've seen gun rights advocates prevail in a lot of these cases to this point. So not surprised to see it come down that way, but it's fairly remarkable how well and how consistently they've performed in all these different circuits around the country. And plus this one is a panel ruling, so it establishes precedent in the Eighth Circuit, right? So that entire circuit is now has to consider this, every state in the Eighth Circuit. Well, and there's a number of them in there. It's sort of the, not Midwestern, but like
it is Midwest. Yeah.
The Midwest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where the Midwest begins and ends, but it's in the middle of the country.
And people get really fired up about where the Midwest is and isn't.
But regardless, it's a very significant ruling on that front for 18 to 20-year-olds in that part of the country. And I wouldn't be surprised if this makes it to the court at some point down the line.
Yeah.
Although it seems the lower courts have all been pretty consistent in finding that gun rights extend to 18 to 20-year-olds.
Yeah, it is one of those ones where it's not like hardware bans or even sensitive place restrictions where there seems to be consistency in one direction or another, usually against gun rights advocates, because as we've covered before, there's sort of this common framework that a lot of these judges are adopting to hold some of these things. 18 to 20-year-olds is one of those ones, like you said, it's sort of been a rare bright spot for, I mean, there's a handful of rulings here or there that have found the opposite direction, but almost across the board, you've seen 18 to 20-year-olds get gun rights upheld by these courts.
Yeah.
But
plus, this was a post Rahimi decision too.
That's what I was going to say. It's interesting that this one, it certainly cites Rahimi, but this analysis easily could have come before Rahimi was ever decided. So in other words, it basically takes the position that Rahimi didn't change much for the Bruin analysis, certainly at least on these types of questions. So I think that's notable too, because a lot of the discussion post Rahimi has been, well, what does this actually mean for Second Amendment litigation? Obviously, the DOJ didn't think it clarified much. They asked the court to take a whole bunch of cases. The court said no.
Which the court didn't.
Yeah, and the court said no. And now we're just sort of left with, well, what is this actually going to mean? And this is one of our first major indications that it actually doesn't mean much for Second Amendment litigation.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, certainly the specific finding in Rahimi wouldn't affect this because that is about temporarily disarming people who've been found to be a danger to others,
right?
Which is not what 18 to 20-year-old bans do, right? There's no individual
Although
findings.
The state tried to make that case. They tried to say that 18 to 20-year-olds as a group are dangerous, and the court was having none of that.
Which is what they've tried to do in all these cases, basically.
Yeah.
So demographically, 18 to 20-year-olds are dangerous, which, like, I don't know, you start doing demographic breakdowns of trying to group anyone in a specific demographic together as they all must be the same. Things start to get pretty dark pretty fast.
Yeah, so that gets ugly pretty quick.
Yeah. So not a great approach, but regardless, it's not individualized finding. So yeah, Rahimi's specific hold one wouldn't have purchase, but I think that, obviously the concern or the question was, will the way that they got to that specific answer have a big effect down in lower courts? And, we haven't seen a big effect yet, although there've been a couple cases and there've been some that have gone the other way. So we'll keep an eye on it. It might be something worth diving into a little deeper at some point. Just to try
I might write for the members piece this weekend. So members, stay tuned in case I take that piece up.
There you go. Because it'll be good to see, like, well, what's really happening after Rahimi with these cases. But what else we have? Massachusetts, right, they passed a big law, like sort of an extremely fast fashion, right?
Yes, this comes to us from our newsletter links. Mass Live reported Wednesday that this big conference committee that's been working for months now to try to hammer out a deal between the Massachusetts House and Senate over this omnibus gun control package. It's sort of been an ongoing saga.
This a while back, right?
Yeah, it's been over a year.
And it kind of fell apart, and then I guess it's come together at the last moment here.
So Wednesday they announced they had a deal, or Thursday. Yeah, Thursday, because today's Friday. Wednesday afternoon they had a deal, and Thursday both houses passed the bill that they decided on in the same day. So it's cleared the legislature in one day, which is pretty remarkable. And it's it's kind of what a lot of people were expecting it was going to be. It's sort of a grab bag of various gun control policies. They expand their existing assault weapon ban. They expand their existing red flag law by including new people that can file a red flag order. They regulate
professionals, I guess.
Medical professionals. They regulate ghost guns for the first time, or so-called ghost guns, homemade firearms, 3D printed firearms, that sort of a thing. They include some new sensitive spaces restrictions, but interestingly, they're a former May issue state. They haven't gone as far in that direction as the other former May issue states. They limited it to just schools, polling places, and government buildings. So,
which are pretty common, even pre-Bruin in most shall issue states, you'll have those restrictions, or not most, but a lot.
Yeah. So it's interesting that they went that route. I think that says something. Perhaps maybe litigation impacted their decision there.
Yeah, it is interesting because Massachusetts, you'd expect them to go full bore, but not on that.
So yeah, it looks like a new gigantic gun control bill is headed to the governor's desk, and she'll almost certainly sign it because it is Massachusetts. So
yeah, and I would imagine the devil's in the details with a lot of these proposals because they don't sound like massive shifts. I mean, Massachusetts already has some extremely strict gun laws, right?
Yeah.
They sound more like tweaks to restrictions they already have, but depending on how big the tweak is, it could have a huge impact. Like the assault weapons ban. I mean, Massachusetts is a place where they had the Attorney General issue an opinion that on copycat guns that kind of made any gun she thinks should be banned. So it's a place that's already going to be very restrictive on what you can own, and so we'll see what's in what new features I guess they've added.
Yeah, that's an important point, but I think it also speaks to just how rapidly they crammed this through that we haven't even had time to dig through all the details. It was they announced that they had come to an agreement, but didn't release the text of their agreement, and then in a day just pushed it through this massive package. So people are still digesting what's actually in this thing, which is, I think that says something. The fact that they didn't even give a lot of folks oversight time, but we'll stay on top of what happens, especially when it's signed. Maybe we'll do a story on it and kind of dig through the details.
Good idea.
But then the last link we want to hit before we wrap up here, another circuit court decision going sort of the other way if you're a gun rights advocate. So you had a story a few months back, a 3-judge panel on that circuit had ruled that the felon in possession ban was unconstitutional as applied to a particular nonviolent felon. Mm-hmm. Well, now the en banc Ninth Circuit, so the full court, has decided to vacate that decision and rehear the case in full, which is pretty familiar to a lot of people that listen to this. It's something that they tend to do quite often when there's a Second Amendment ruling that goes in the gun rights direction. And one of their circuit judges actually commented on that. Judge Van Dyke, who has done this before, wrote another dissent from this rehearing en banc and basically took them to task for almost in every case doing this. And he also had some critical words for the Supreme Court for not taking these felon in possession cases when the DOJ asked, and superintending this stuff more closely and allowing, in his opinion, allowing the Ninth Circuit to get away with doing this. So kind of a fiery, unusual thing for a judge to do, although he's done something similar in the past.
Not unusual for him, I guess, but for most judges.
But just interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're expecting the Ninth Circuit en banc to uphold or to go the same way as the district court and strike down the nonviolent felon gun possession ban, just don't hold your breath is what I would. That's my advice. But we'll see. I mean, their track record is basically to side with the government in every single gun case. Yeah, so
it is. But one thing that's interesting is that the panel decision came down pre-Rahimi, and they're going to be rehearing this post-Rahimi. So maybe there's something in Rahimi that will change the way they think. I wouldn't hold my breath, but maybe the individualized finding of dangerousness, maybe that comes into play. We'll see. But
yeah, I doubt it. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, I think they'd be more likely to use Rahimi and take a more generalized approach to the historical tradition necessary to hold the gun laws. That's my expectation. But we will, like you said, we'll see. I mean, this is, I know people like to assume that they always know what the outcome of every court case is, and I just did kind of allude to that, to be fair. But sometimes you get surprises. Most people didn't expect the NRA to get a 9-0 win at the Supreme Court this year, and they did. We'll see. We'll see what they do and how things come out. It's just, you look at the track record of this court and you can make fair guesses based off of that. But we're always here to tell you what actually happens rather than just guessing at it. So we'll keep you up to date.
Absolutely. You got any big plans this weekend as we wrap up here?
I want to see Twisters.
The remake.
You ever see Twister?
Oh yeah, I used to love that movie.
Oh, so good. The new one looks fun. I don't know. Whatever. Like it's what it's a summer blockbuster movie. That's what it's supposed to be.
Twister. Big tornadoes destroying stuff. Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Absolutely.
Why not, man? I'm down for that. Maybe get some shooting in. I wouldn't mind. You know, I did Smith and Wesson put out a couple new guns. I don't know if you saw that.
I did see that. Yeah.
They got some new carry guns. There's the new shield. You know, I feel like they're still behind though. Yeah, their new shield still only holds like 15. My X macro holds 17. I don't know. I think they have an all metal one now. That's another trend that everybody's going to. Is forget the polymer frames. We're
going back to the 80s.
Polymer guns.
Yeah.
So that's the thing everybody wants to do now. But what most interests me is the new bodyguard. They finally made another bodyguard, which is their little tiny 380.
The 380
concealed carry. And I don't know, 380 seems a bit underpowered for self-defense to me. But if you're a very small person, like my girlfriend's 4'11", so she doesn't have a lot of real estate to conceal a firearm, and that's where maybe maybe this new bodyguard would be an option. You know, if it's smaller than a 365, which that's been the other problem with 380s lately. Then nobody's really innovating in that space. Everyone's doing 9, probably for the reason I just mentioned, which is that most people prefer 9 for self-defense to 380.
Right.
But the 9s are as small as the 380s in a lot of cases. And there just hasn't been a lot of good options in the 380 space. The whole, make the guns smaller. Like, I know smaller guns are harder to shoot generally, but if the idea is concealed carry, especially for smaller people with smaller frames, like, make the guns smaller. Like, why can't we have a slimmed down version of 365 that shoots 380? And the bodyguard is like ancient, right? That's a gun from like 15 years ago. It's very small. It definitely fits that super small package, but I don't think it's a very good gun like the LCP and some of these other super small options. If they could at least bring things up to a 365 or shield level of competence in the gun, it might be something worth considering. I don't know. I'll have to go and shoot one and see what it's actually like. Have her shoot one. But yeah, that does intrigue me at least. It does look kind of big though, to be fair. Like, it doesn't look as small as the old bodyguard does.
Yeah. So
I'll have to see it in person. I don't know. You seen any interesting guns lately?
Yeah, I haven't poked into a gun store in a little while, but I get too tempted and then end up coming home with something that I don't need. So yeah, I
still want a Lago Alien, but I don't think the price is ever going to come down on those things.
Yeah. That's
got to be the last gun I shot that I was like, yeah, this is awesome and totally unique. And I actually shoot better because of the gun in a very noticeable way over some of the, like my 320 X5, there's something mid-level competition gun or whatever. Maybe an STI, but that's, maybe if another couple thousand people buy memberships at the Reload, I can afford some of those guns someday.
There you go.
We'll see.
Fund our gun habits, folks.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I think we're going to head it over to, we don't actually get paid for this. This is a promo swap, but regardless, head over to our little promo here for the Dispatch. I'll tell you guys a little bit about that, and then we'll see you next week. Okay, it is time once again to talk about the Dispatch. We're doing a promo swap. We've been doing it for a little while now, and it's a pretty easy thing for me to get behind because I've been a paying subscriber at the Dispatch really since it launched, and I think it's one of the best publications out there, especially in your center right media, your conservative media. In large part because they focus, like we do here at the Reload, on hard news reporting first. That's what they were founded to do. That's where they put a lot of their energies. I read the Morning Dispatch every single day to keep up to date with what's going on in the country, in politics, and in news from a national perspective. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who's listening, there's a free trial if you follow the link in our bio here or down below in the description over at the Reload's website or in the newsletter. You'll find the link to that free trial, so you can, not just take my word for it, but go and try out a subscription over there. You'll get access to all kinds of great original hard news reporting. That's their sort of bread and butter, I would say, especially stuff that, it's great to read the Morning Dispatch because it gives you a little bit of a different approach, a little bit of a different take on these stories that they're finding and that they're reporting, and they're gathering information and bringing it to you. And it just has a different editorial take as well. It's more for the politically homeless, for people like, I think there was 53% in the most recent Pew poll that wanted a different option than what they have in the current presidential election. So if you feel that way, I think you probably find yourself right at home over at the Dispatch. Of course, they have a big name and analysts and opinion writers there as well who come from a center-right perspective, people you've heard of before, I'm sure. Jonah Goldberg, Steve Hayes, Kevin Williamson, I'll pun if you've been deeply immersed in online media for the last 15 years like I have, one of the best writers out there. And, it continues on down the line. They've got a really great lineup of writers over there. Chris Steyerwalt's another really good one. It's just a fantastic publication. And this is actually getting long. I don't think I'm supposed to go on for this long, but it's easy to do that when I'm talking about this, because I have a lot of respect for what they've done. Another independent publication, startup. They've really had a great success, and I think they're the model for our industry, and also a place where you're going to find value if you go over and check them out. So, click the link, get your free trial, try them out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But yeah, the Dispatch, head over and check them out.